Hi, everyone, and welcome back to week 5 presentation. Sorry about that. So, in sexual communication, communication is really, really important in developing and maintaining sexual relationship. So, first, think about in a sexual relationship, you need to be able to tell your partner what you want, but not only what you want, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, too much pressure, too little pressure. And communication is really the number one factor in maintaining and keeping a sexually active and healthy relationship. And it helps show what's your knowledge, what are your values from your childhood to adolescent, helps you establish relationship, and then exploring and maintaining sexuality in couples as you grow old together. But sexual communication is also a gendered phenomenon, and peer sexual communication carries significant weight. There are gender differences driven by same-sex peer communication and also uphold traditional sex roles amongst different genders. So when we first start off a relationship, we generally have this halo effect with our partner. And that is just assuming that they are just so great and have all these desirable qualities and everyone's going to love them and they're perfect. So it's a halo, right? Like they're just so much better, such a great person, and you don't see the negative parts, the negative characteristics. And then after that, it begins to be a little more in line with who they actually are. But typically, to first enter that relationship, you have this halo effect. You think this other person's just so great, so wonderful. Someone has to make the first move to signal some transition from like non-physical, non-relationship to a physical intimacy. And first, when you first start a sexual relationship with someone, one of the first things should be to have a discussion about what it means to have sex, to have safe sex. Is someone wearing a condom? Is someone on the pill? Is someone taking an IUD? And then to talk about the risks of each of those options. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there are gender differences in partner communication. And Deborah Tannen has conducted a lot of research on gendered communication. And here are some of the highlights. That when we look at when men talk, they tend to focus on relative hierarchy. So they want to be in a higher position verbally, talking more, talking louder compared to the other people in the group. Women focus on making connections with people, so finding common ground. In partnered conversations, reflect both hierarchy, so who has the power, and connection, along with obviously different conversation styles. Men are more likely to avoid talking about feelings and personal issues, while some women may be inclined to show more interest and to seek agreement from their partner. Men generally use more crude slang and equate erotic terms with feelings of closeness. So think about that. Equate erotic terms with feelings of closeness. So using terms that refer to body parts helps them feel close. Doesn't necessarily mean they're being rude or they have a different opinion of you. It's their way of showing that they are close with you. When we first start in a relationship, a lot of the tasks are to develop trust, and that you do this by self disclosing and talking about yourself and getting feedback about yourself. Self disclosure helps create this mutual understanding between you and your partner. And when there is a lack of self disclosure, it's often seen as being deceptive. You're not sharing who you truly are. And especially when it looks at one's response to sexual activity, or what about orgasm and safer sex practices. So, therefore, trust is a belief in the reliability and integrity of a person. And it's critical because self disclosure makes us vulnerable, and trust influences how we interpret ambiguous messages. Feedback is the ongoing process of restating or checking the accuracy or questioning and clarifying messages that you're getting from the talker. With anything, conflict is completely normal in relationships and intimacy. And it's the process by which people perceive that incompatible goals And interference from others is hindering them from achieving their goals. So, the more intimate two people become, the more likely they are to experience conflict. And I always say that the opposite of conflict or hate is nothing. It's feeling ambivalent, it's not caring. And so when there is no conflict and there's no arguments and there's no disagreements, there's nothing, then there are very few feelings there. So here are some of the main reasons maybe that could lead to conflict or disagreements about sex. One person wants to be sexual and the other doesn't. Sex is sometimes used as a scapegoat for non-sexual problems. I'm only cranky. Example of that is I'm only cranky because I haven't had sex in a week or 2 weeks. I'm feeling frustrated. Arguments can be a cover-up for feelings of disinterest. When one person has a really low sex drive, or a lack of interest, maybe they start fights. They don't have to continue to say no to sex. For couples with children, just awareness of the common relationship patterns can help them deal with conflict. Having children is very difficult, and so you need to be a team to tackle it together. Next chapter is sexual expression. All right, so sexual attractiveness. What is sexually attractive? What do we see as beautiful? So generally, worldwide, men and women both consider youthfulness and health important in terms of sexual attractiveness. Sociobiologists theorize that the capability for healthy reproduction and support of offspring is key. And so perhaps that's why we tend to want people who are youthful and healthy, because then we are going to have healthier children as a result. But there are differences culture to culture. And there are differences in what part of the body is considered erotic and what is attractive and what's not. One common theme has been symmetry. So the more symmetrical your face is, the more attractive you are. Scent is another significant factor. And so while people won't come out and say, I didn't like that person's scent and pheromones, it definitely has an influence in what you find to be attractive. So here's some evolutionary mating perspectives. Sexual strategies theory addresses gender differences in short-term and long-term heterosexual relationships from an evolutionary mating perspective. So here the purpose is to mate, to have kids. Males and females face different adaptative problems in casual mating and long-term reproductive mating. And these are different strategies and behaviors on both parts. Women are predicted to avoid short-term relationships given the possible cost, but the opposite is evident for men. Women, the real value is to have a long-term relationship. And if you have babies, you have a father, you have that support system to help you care for the children. Women are more likely than men to value post-coital activities that reflect or promote pair bonding. So post-coital means after sex activities, cuddling, watching TV, talking, all those activities that occur after sex helps promote additional bonding and emotional connection for women. Mate poaching is a mating strategy that involves luring a person who is already in a romantic relationship, either for a short-term fling or for the long term. So the desirable mates attract many suitors and usually end up in a relationship. So here's the reason. So the desirable mates, it's difficult to find them at a time when they're single. Therefore, finding a desirable mate often means seeking those who are already in a relationship. But some scientists have questioned the evolutionary grounds for gender differences here. And such gender differences, when it looks at mate poaching, really may be more the effect of cultural norms than a biological factor. I just put this chart up to show you the frequency of romantic attraction and mate poaching experiences of undergraduate students in college. So, when asked, have you ever had these mate attraction experiences? And here, attempted to attract someone as a long-term mate, attempted to attract someone as a short-term mate, attempted to poach someone as a long-term mate. So to take take her away from the relationship or they away from the relationship for your own. And the same idea, attempt to poach someone for a short-term relationship. So I'll have these slides available separately. You can look at them and see them on your own. All right, so hooking up in the college student. So hooking up is a very natural, normal college experience. And the definitions have changed. When I was in college, hooking up meant making out, fooling around, really anything except for sex. In today's college day, hooking up does include sex in terms of intercourse. It's analogous to the one-night stands of previous generations. Participants do not necessarily expect a subsequent sexual encounter or even a romantic commitment. However, even with that, most adults still prefer sex within a romantic relationship, so within a relationship. And the hookup culture has many troubling characteristics, that there's oftentimes double standard favoring male pleasure. So it's seen as okay for a male to hook up, but not okay for females to hook up. And when we look at what influences sexual desire, so there are many different influences. It could be physical, emotional, sexual relationship issues. Men in both same-sex and mixed-sex relationships express moderately higher levels of sexual desire compared to women. But both men and women in same-sex relationships report greater sexual desire than those in mixed-sex relationships. Two factors and two words that are related to this are erotophilia and erotophobia. Erotophilia is a positive emotional response to sexuality, whereas erotophobia, so phobia is a fear, a negative emotional response to sexuality. These traits are not fixed, doesn't mean that you will feel them forever. Generally, positive experiences can alter erotophobic responses. The other is also true. Negative sexual experiences can also alter erotophilia responses. So sexual scripts are culturally based and they're highly gendered. It strongly influences our sexuality as a man or woman or how we identify. And they have several distinct components. The cultural component provides the general pattern that sexual behaviors are expected to take. The interpersonal component deals with the internal and psychological state that you're in. How do you identify sexual arousal? What are your own definitions of sex? What are you comfortable doing? And then interpersonal components involve conversation between you and the other person that you are going to engage in sex with, or the multiple people that you are going to engage in sex with. Another term called autoeroticism is sexual activities that only involve yourself, so only self. It tends to be intrapersonal because there's no one else to talk to. It's you and yourself, me, myself, and I. And it includes sexual fantasies or erotic dreams, viewing sexually explicit materials by yourself, viewing pornography, using sex toys, and masturbation, which is the stimulation of your genitals for pleasure. Generally, those who engage in very little autoerotic activity are less likely to have a partner than those who engage in different kinds of autoerotic activity. When we look at sexual fantasies and dreams, men and women often think about sex often and experience numerous different fantasies. More men than women report thinking about sex at least once a day. Erotic fantasy is probably the most universal of all sexual fantasies. Fantasies are part of the body's regular healthy functioning, so it's very normal to have fantasies about sex. And generally, the higher the sex drive, the higher the frequency of sexual fantasies and the level of satisfaction in one's sex life. So there are gender differences in fantasies experienced by US men and women. Men are definitely more sexually explicit. If it's a fantasy in their head, they often involve multiple partners. There's also some dominance there, lots of nudity, and so forth. Where women tend to be more emotional romantic, more likely to involve a single partner, and more likely to involve submission. Um, and I always, when I think of this, I think of the romance novels and the covers of the romance novels. That is what I think of when I think of women and their sexual fantasies. There is a greater acceptance of rape myths that are linked to dominance themes among men and emotional romantic themes among women. And again, I don't want to say that these are wrong in any sense. These are just fantasies. And so fantasies are healthy. It's when fantasies leak to real life that there becomes a problem. But generally, and in most cases, fantasies are just that. Women tend to mention fantasies related only to their own desire and pleasure, while men will talk about their fantasies and pleasure of their partners as well as their own. So the function of sexual fantasies, why do we have them? What purpose do they serve? There's a couple of number of important functions. One is to help direct and define our erotic goals. It allows us to plan for or anticipate situations that may arise. They provide an escape from a dull or oppressive environment. And even when our sex lives are satisfactory, they bring novelty and excitement to the relationship. And like dreams, they may offer clues to our current interests, pleasures, anxieties, fears, or problems. And then there's masturbation. So people masturbate for many different reasons. It could be to relax, to relieve sexual tension, for pleasure, or to help fall asleep. And partners are not going to be available all the time, or your partner doesn't want sex, or you just want to be alone and enjoy yourself. It's a way to avoid getting an STI or getting pregnant. And it's also a really important way to learn about your own body and what feels good and what doesn't feel good without the scrutiny of someone else. Unfortunately, even still today, most young people receive very little positive information about masturbation and must come to terms with this dual stigma and pleasure cultural message from people saying, well, it's not okay, but everyone does it. So in the prevalence varies by culture, but generally, masturbation is very common. It's considered typical and pleasurable and part of an individual and a couple's sexuality. It can be practiced alone or in a relationship. It occurs among people of all ages, all sexual orientations, all ethnicities, all genders. Um, Masturbation behavior is influenced by education, ethnicity, religion, and age. Of those, education is a really strong factor. So the more educated a person is, the more frequently they are likely to masturbate. Masturbation is really common among youth. It peaks during the youth adulthood and then tends to decrease in later years. Generally, women who masturbate appear to hold more positive sexual attitudes and are more likely to be orgasmic and have orgasms not only by themselves, but when they are also with partners. No two women masturbate exactly the same. Among men, masturbation is more frequent for those with less vaginal intercourse or in same sex partnerships. And nearly all methods among men involve the same type of direct stimulation of the penis with the hand. So while women all masturbate very differently, for men it tends to be the same behavior. And most people continue to masturbate after they marry or are in a steady relationship. So here is an image of women age 18 to 39 who have ever participated in a sexual behavior. And then it says here what those behaviors are. So again, this is among women. But you can see the different races. So solo masturbation, partner masturbation, gave oral sex to a male partner, received oral sex from a male partner, vaginal intercourse, and anal intercourse. And sexual intercourse is really important. For many men, the term sex and intercourse are the same. Most men will have one orgasm during an intercourse session. But for many heterosexual women, intercourse is the most central, but not the only component of their sexual satisfaction. More than any other sexual activity, sexual intercourse can involve equal participation by both partners. And there are multiple sex or benefits from having sex. So it brings joy and satisfaction. People who have frequently engaged in sexual activity also report numerous health benefits, less stress, improved mood, less depression. A psychologist once said, Beverly Whipple, it's not entirely clear whether sex makes people healthier or whether healthier people tend to have more sex. But good sex and good health reinforce each other. This concludes the presentation this week. Have a wonderful week and let me know if you have any questions or concerns.